Let's now check out the prototypal inheritance and prototype chain on a building and objects such as array. But actually, let's start this by inspecting some of the stuff we just talked about in the last video, and we will keep using this person example that we have been building. So let's start by taking a look at the John underscore underscore proto underscore underscore, and we already know that this is the prototype of the John, which is exactly prototype property of the person. And so therefore it is this object which contains each method that we defined earlier, and also this property, so this species property. So but now let's actually move out in the prototype chain. Essentially take a look at the prototype of John prototype, and it is indeed this prototype property of object here. So that's why you can see that constructor is the object here, and then right away we can see this method, so this has own property. And so this is the reason why we can do this. So why we can call has a property on John. This works because of the prototype chain. And so that is this object that we are inspecting right now. But let's take this one step further and check out the prototype of the prototype of the prototype. And do you remember what this one is? It is null. And so that's because object.prototype is usually the top of the scope chain. So this one here, so this one is gonna be object.prototype, and so that is the top of the prototype chain. We can also take a look at that string constructor property that we also saw earlier. So remember, %.prototype itself has a constructor property which, as we said, will point back to the person itself. So here we actually get the function itself. Now if you want to inspect that function here, we need to use console.dir. And so here indeed we see that constructor property points back at person. So that is this. Now to make things a bit more complicated even, let's now take a look at the prototype of a function. So any function is also an object, and so therefore it also has a prototype, but maybe this is a bit too confusing, so just leave this here. So I will first show you the prototype of arrays, and maybe then we can move it a bit further to the function. So actually let's do that now. Just like any random number, so the value here don't matter at all. All I'm interested is now to take a look at the proto property, so the prototype of the array. So let's see, here it is. So this is the prototype of array, and you see that here we have all these methods that we already know. So we have fill, filter, find index, and all of these methods that we studied in one of the earlier sessions. And so this is the reason why all the arrays get access to all of these methods. So each array does not contain all of these methods, but instead each array will inherit from methods from its prototype. And we can also check out that this prototype has got to be exactly array, which is the constructor function dot prototype. So one more time, the prototype property of constructor function is gonna be the prototype of all the objects created by that constructor. And so let's see, and indeed it is true. Just like an object using this shorthand, basically it's the same as using new array, and therefore whenever we create array like this is indeed created by the array constructor, and that's why all of this works behind the scene. But of course this is not yet the end of the prototype chain, as we saw in the last video. And so let's see, and so now we are back to heavy object of prototype. So this again now has O property. Then all of these methods here are available for objects. And one more time, this is simply because the prototype itself is an object. And so any object has access to all of these methods. So let's actually take this one step further. So we know at this point that any array inherits all the methods from its prototype, and therefore we can use that knowledge to extend the functionality of our arrays even further. So all we have to do is to say array.prototype, and then here we can add any new method to this prototype, and all the arrays we inherit. So let's say we wanted to create a method which will return all the unique elements on the array. So we added a method called unique. So we set the unique property to a function, and then to get the unique value of array, all we have to do is to create new set, and this keyword is going to be the array on which this method will be called. And so now we just need to put this into an array and spread it like this, as we have already done multiple times before. And so we can now use that. So array.unique, and this should return an array with only unique values, so we don't have a lot of duplicate here. So let's add another 6 here, and maybe another 9. And so let's see what happened. So indeed that works. So just recap, we added a new method to prototype property of the array constructor, and so therefore now all arrays will inherit this method, and so we can then call that method on any array that we want. How about what we just did here? So extending the prototype of the abandoned object is generally not a good idea. I mean, if you are working just on a small project on your own, then I guess you could do this. But really, don't get into the habit of doing this for multiple reasons. The first reason is that the next version of JavaScript might add a new method with the same name that we are adding, for example this one here, but it might work in a different ways, and so your code will then use that new method which works differently, and then that will probably break your code. And the second reason why you shouldn't do this is because when you work team on the developer, then this is really gonna be a bad idea, because if multiple developers implement the same method with a different name, then that's just going to create so many bugs that it's just not worth do this. So it's just a nice and fun experiment, but in practice you should probably not do this. Now for a little bit of fun to finish this video, let's take a look at some more binary objects here in the console. For example, we can select this dot element here. So let's do that now. So that's document.queryServer.h1, and we already know that all the DOM elements are behind the scene objects. And so let's take a look at this object where that doesn't really work. So let's console.dir. And so now we get actual object. So here we have all these different stuff and all these properties and methods that we already work with. But what I'm interested here is the prototype. If you go down there, this one, and you see that prototype is an HTML heading element, and so that it will contain a lot of different stuff. So one more time, so let's scroll down all the way down. And so this is the HTML element. And so now here we actually inspect them. And so behind the scene, these different elements are really different, like a constructor function. So if we go down here, so we should see this element. HTML element was a child element of element, and element itself was a child of node. If we go down here, you see, and therefore the prototype of element is gonna be node. Then you see the node, and now this one is an event target. If we go down there, this one is an event target. And so you will see this is a huge property chain, and only now we are at the end. And so the end is an object. If you go down there, the end, this is the end of the object. So if we inspect then, so no more. That's it. So this prototype chain has easily 6 or 7 levels. And you see that it can go really deep. So if you want to go and check this out by yourself, then this probably be a really nice exercise. And finally, let's just also console.dir some random function. So the function does not matter. I just want to be able to look at the function. And so as I mentioned a bit earlier in this video, the function itself is also an object. And so therefore it also has prototype. And in this case, to prototype will contain the methods that we have used previously on the function. So that's a apply, bind, call. And so once again, this is the reason why we can actually call methods on functions. So it's because they are objects have prototypes, and in this case, this function prototypes.